All right, let's jump right into one of nature's biggest head scratchers. We're talking about vampire bats and this one thing they do, an act of kindness that, on the surface, seems to completely break the rules of survival of the fittest. And this right here, this is the heart of the puzzle. Imagine this, a bat that's just had a good meal will literally, and gets kind of gross, throw up its own food, this precious blood meal, to feed a buddy who's starving. We're not talking about just sharing some scraps. This is a lifeline. And you can imagine, for the longest time, scientists were just baffled by this. So, that leads us to the big question, right? In a world that's all about survival of the fittest, where it's every creature for itself, how in the world does a behavior like self-sacrifice even exist, let alone thrive? It feels like it goes against everything we know about natural selection.
Now, this paradox, it's not some new thing scientists just stumbled upon. Honestly, this kind of selfless behavior has been a huge headache for evolutionary theory pretty much from day one.
Okay, so let's get a key term straight so we're all on the same page. We're talking about altruism. In biology, that just means any behavior where you help someone else, but it costs you something. It bumps up their chances of survival while lowering your own. Think of it like a biological balance sheet where you're willingly taking a loss.
And that's the conflict. Darwin's whole theory, right, is about passing on your genes. You survive, you reproduce, you win. But altruism, it looks like the complete opposite. It drove Darwin crazy. He actually called it a special difficulty and worried it could be fatal to my whole theory. I mean, that's how big of a puzzle this was.
Okay, so to really get why they share, we've got to understand just how dangerous life is for a vampire bat. I mean, their entire existence is lived on a razor's edge. Get a load of this number, 70 hours. That's it. That's the deadline. See, these bats have a super fast metabolism, and blood isn't exactly a nutrient-packed superfood. So if one of them misses a meal for just 2 nights, it starves to death. The clock is always ticking. And here's the key thing to understand. The stakes are totally lopsided. For the starving bat, getting that meal is everything. It's literally the difference between life and death. But for the bat who's already eaten, the cost is pretty small. It's just giving up part of its dinner. So the benefit to the one receiving the food is way bigger than the cost to the one giving it. All right, so we know how high the stakes are. Now let's put on our detective hats and figure out how science cracked this case. It really comes down to a couple of major ideas. So clue number 1 is something called kin selection. The idea is pretty straightforward. It makes sense to help your family because they share your genes. You help them survive, you're helping your own genes survive. And yeah, bats totally do this. Moms feed their kids, siblings help each other. But, and this is the big twist, they also share with bats they're not related to at all. So, kin selection, it's just part of the story. Which brings us to the main event, reciprocal altruism. The easiest way to think about it, it's basically a biological IOU. The whole system works on a simple promise. I'll scratch your back now because I'm counting on you to scratch mine later when I need it. It's all about cooperation today for a payoff tomorrow. But, for a system like this to actually work, you need a few things to be true. It's like a checklist. First, you need to hang out with the same individuals over and over. Second, you've got to be able to tell who's who. Third, you need a good memory to keep track of who helped who. And finally, like we said, the favor has to be worth more to the receiver than it costs the giver. And vampire bats, they check every single one of those boxes perfectly. So the question is, how do they pull this off? I mean, it's like complex social accounting. Well, it turns out they have this incredibly sophisticated social playbook. And this is what's truly mind-blowing. Just how smart these bats are. They can tell each other apart using specific smells and their own unique calls. They have amazing long-term memories, so they know exactly who helped them out last time. They are, for all intents and purposes, keeping track of social credit scores. They know who's a good friend and who's a freeloader. So this gives you a peek into their decision-making. When a bat is thinking about sharing, it's running through a few questions in its head. Are we family? How badly does this guy need it? Are we good friends? But the number one thing, the most important factor, past history. A bat is way, way more likely to share with another bat that's shared with it before. At the end of the day, reciprocity is king. Okay, so let's pull back from the bat cave for a second. What's the bigger picture here? Well, the lessons are surprisingly universal. They tell us a whole lot about how cooperation itself evolves. And this is the big takeaway. All these things we tend to think of as being uniquely human, fairness, trust, gratitude, even keeping an eye out for cheaters,
They're not just our inventions. They have incredibly deep evolutionary roots. The bats show us that the fundamental building blocks of our own social lives were being shaped by evolution long, long before we ever showed up on the scene. And that kind of leaves us with a really fascinating thought to chew on. In our world, where cooperation feels more critical than ever, what can we learn from a vampire bat's simple but powerful system of trust and reciprocity? What can it teach us about how we build and strengthen the bonds in our own communities? It's just a powerful reminder, isn't it, that sometimes the most profound lessons come from the most unexpected of places.